Poor Jar Jar. I don't know whether there's ever been another character from another franchise that has been so universally derided and absolutely despised by the fan base. But at the time of the release of The Phantom Menace, Jar Jar was tipped for big things. I generally think that the people behind the film really thought that Jar Jar was going to be a big hit with the kids and that he was going to be around for all 3 films in a major way. Obviously, that changed and he was scaled back significantly in the later films. But in anticipation of the success of this character, Hasbro were quick to make sure that they got out a number of different scale versions of this character in figure form, and one of those included the 12-inch line, which we're going to take a look at today. So the packaging will be very familiar to anyone who's bought any of the other 12-inch figures in this line. It does of course have that standard window display. We can see the character in there. Behind him is the red lightsaber branding that we are familiar with from the Power of the Force line, and of course at the bottom we have Darth Maul's face there and the Star Wars logo. Otherwise, not an awful lot going on, but this still looks pretty dynamic. Obviously, mine's a little bit battered after surviving in the loft all these years, but he still looks pretty nice on display. Now, if we flip it and look at the side panel, again, we can see this is consistent with the other figures in the line. They have this sort of mini window display, which is done in the sort of Naboo style, or Coruscant style, I think, actually. But it looks quite nice, but it's not very distinct. So if you want to put these characters side by side on the shelf, they all look pretty much the same, which is disappointing. Now, if we look at the back of the box, we can see the other figures in this wave. And amazingly, Jar Jar was released in that initial first wave with Darth Maul and Qui-Gon Jinn. So quite a contrast there in terms of public opinion about these characters, but again, thinking in the mindset of Hasbro at the time, it does make perfect sense that you'd want to get a child-friendly character out there as well. So at this point, Jar Jar has a lot riding against him, but I have to say this is actually a very nice figure, and that might be heresy to some fans out there, but genuinely I think this is a very nice figure in its own right. I think the sculptors have done a really nice job with this head sculpt. It's very faithful to what we see on screen, and of course it's a very different kind of sculpt, very different kind of portrait that we see from the other more human-like characters. This is very alien, and I think they've done a really nice job of it. The overall paint apps look really good. I love that gradation between the orange to the sort of the lighter beige, and the paint job, particularly on the eyes, is so intricate, and it's very, very nicely done. Also, you can see the level of detailing in those tattoos on his arms. I just think that's a really nice touch, and they've done a really good job with the paint apps on this figure. Likewise, his costume is really nicer too. He's got this sort of faux leather effect for his tunic and his belt and his trousers, and it's a really sumptuous, kind of nice texture to the touch. And I'm amazed to say that after all these years, it hasn't flaked, it hasn't faded away like a lot of the toys from this era that use similar effects. It looks really, really good and still looks like pristine all these years later, and I'm very impressed by that. You'll also notice that virtually every part on this figure is brand new and unique to this figure, so you've got to give Hasbro top marks for that, for pushing the boat out and taking a chance with this guy. And I think it pays off because this looks really nice and very, very different to any other figures in the line. If we look at his arms and his hands, for example, obviously you can't use them on any other figures. This is a hard plastic, it's sculpted, and of course it is much narrower than what we're used to seeing with those sort of more traditional action man bodies. So this is very distinctive, it's very unique to this character, and I think, as I said, they've done a very good job with this. Again, we can see it's going all the way down to the feet as well, and the legs. They're completely individual, unique. He's got a bit more height than the other figures in this line, and it looks really, really good. And because he is so different in terms of his parts, his articulation's slightly different. He does have that ball joint in the neck, which I'm a big fan of. It doesn't work quite as well with Jar Jar because of those big plastic ears. They're definitely a hindrance for him being able to move his head from side to side and push his head back. So you can't get quite the most out of this articulation, but it is still pretty decent, and he can move forwards and backwards. Now, he does have these ball joints in his arms, and he can get his arms a really healthy distance up there. And of course, they swivel around, and there's another swivel at the elbow, so this is very different. Likewise, it's a straight swivel at the wrist as well. Now, he does have a ball joint in his waist, so he can move from side to side, he can lean left to right, and of course, he can even bend forwards and backwards a little bit as well. Now, he's got the ball joint in the hips, so legs do kick out to the side, they kick forwards, and they kick backwards, and there is a single joint at the knee there that allows that lower leg to bend all the way back there, which is pretty good. Sadly, he doesn't come with any accessories at all, which is a shame, but otherwise, I think this is a really nice figure. Now, I appreciate that Jar Jar probably isn't anyone's favourite figure, and this wasn't my favourite character or my favourite figure as a kid, but that said, I actually didn't mind Jar Jar too much at the time, and I actually really liked this figure, and I like him probably more now in hindsight all these years later, because I really appreciate this for being a really nicely made toy, being so different to anything else in this line, and I think it's very well made, and it still looks really good all these years later. So I suppose ultimately, if you're a collector and you don't have this one, it might come down to how you feel about just toys generally, or about this character. I can't say I'd recommend him if you really despise the character. You're probably not going to want to go anywhere near him, but if you like good quality toys, and if you like this line, he's a solid addition, and you could do far worse than Jar Binks. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.